The Germans were certain. The British line had collapsed, the regiment was retreating, and the road toward the strategic position was practically open. Standing before them was only one man, a single gunner, a madman according to some, a hero to others, a soldier who carried a sword, an English longbow, and the conviction that war was no excuse to stop fighting with honor. His name was Jack Churchill, Mad Jack, the only soldier in World War II who marched into battle with a Scottish broadsword, and who, according to witnesses, once began an ambush with a lethal arrow shot. That day, an entire army believed they had already won, until he appeared, until his courage, his precision, and his complete absence of fear delayed an entire German division. And the worst part for them was, Jack was still smiling. The man behind the legend. The year was 1939. Europe stood on the edge of the abyss. Hitler had invaded Poland, and the world held its breath as Great Britain prepared to declare war. Inside British military barracks, there was chaos, urgency, fear. Officers checked recruitment lists, studied maps, calculated resources. And then he walked in. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill looked like no other volunteer who had ever crossed those doors. Tall, lean, sporting a carefully groomed mustache and a smile wildly out of place in such dark times. He carried with him three things no other soldier would bring: an English longbow, a Scottish claymore sword, and bagpipes. The recruitment officer stared at him as if he'd materialized from another century. Mr. Churchill? Yes, no relation to Winston, unfortunately, though I do share his fondness for confrontation. Jack Churchill was not a normal soldier. He never had been. Before the war, he had been many things: a professional violinist, a minor Hollywood actor, a photo model, a reckless motorcyclist. But above all, he was a national longbow champion, the best in Britain, perhaps in all of Europe. And now he wanted to go to war, not with a rifle, not with a machine gun, but with the weapons of his ancestors. A living anachronism. Jack's early days in the army were peculiar. While other recruits learned to disassemble Lee Enfield rifles, he was sharpening his sword. While they practiced grenade throwing, he was firing arrows at targets 100 meters away. While they studied modern warfare tactics, he was playing Scottish melodies on his bagpipes, filling the training grounds with sounds from another era. The officers didn't know what to do with him. "He's a dangerous clown," said Captain Henderson, watching him from his office window. "He's going to get himself killed, or worse, get someone else killed." Young soldiers looked at him with a mix of curiosity and mockery. Some called him the medieval knight. Others, less kind, just called him the lunatic. People even placed bets on how long he would last in a real battle. Most guessed less than a week. But something about Jack puzzled even his harshest critics. His aim was impossible, his discipline absolute, his calm under pressure unsettling. During shooting drills, while other recruits missed targets at 50 meters with modern rifles, Jack was hitting bullseyes at 100 meters with arrows, quietly, without the crack of gunfire that would alert an enemy. "Any officer who goes into battle without his sword," he would say with that perpetual smile, "is irresponsible." Whether he was serious or joking,
was impossible to know. Jack never clarified. He simply kept sharpening his claymore, tuning his bow, preparing for a war no one else understood the way he did. The psychology of a warrior. But behind the eccentricity, there was method. Jack Churchill wasn't just a romantic nostalgic. He was a strategist who understood something fundamental about combat, something many modern officers had forgotten: psychology. War, he once told a bunkmate, is not won by technology alone. It's won by fear, confusion, and speed. A man who appears out of the fog with a sword inspires more terror than 10 with rifles. A soldier who dies silently, pierced by an arrow, spreads more panic than 100 killed by bullets. His comrades listened skeptically, but something in his words rang with ancient truth erased from modern tactical manuals. Jack spent his nights studying, not just contemporary military manuals, but medieval archery treatises, ancient battle accounts, samurai philosophy. He blended old and new in his mind, forging a personal combat code that seemed impossible until you saw him in action. And soon enough, the world would see him in action.
May 1940. The collapse. France was falling. The German blitzkrieg had shattered Allied defenses with speed and brutality no one had anticipated. Paris was threatened. British lines were retreating desperately toward Dunkirk. Chaos reigned. In this moment of defeat and withdrawal, Jack Churchill received his baptism of fire. The fog was thick that May morning, the kind of fog that swallows sound, that turns the world ghost-like, where friend and foe blur until it's too late. Jack's regiment had orders to retreat. The position was unsustainable. The Germans were advancing in overwhelming numbers. But someone had to cover the retreat. Someone had to stay behind. Jack volunteered before anyone could protest. "With all due respect, sir," he told his commander, "I'll stay. They'll need at least 30 minutes to evacuate. I'll buy them that time." His commander stared at him. He knew it was a suicide mission. He also knew there was no time to argue. "Churchill, may God be with you." Jack smiled. "I'd prefer my bow with me, sir. It's more reliable." The silence before the storm. The position was a small outpost on a low hill. There was an anti-tank gun, some sandbags, limited ammunition. Nothing more. The rest of the regiment retreated south, toward the sea, toward the hope of evacuation. Jack was alone. He checked his equipment methodically. The anti-tank gun was loaded. He had 3 more shells. His rifle had 2 magazines. And his longbow, of course, 24 arrows, each perfectly balanced, each tip razor-sharp. The fog thinned slightly, and then he saw them. Germans. An advance patrol, 12 men moving with confidence, the swagger of those who believe the battle is already won. They took no great precautions. Why would they? The British were retreating. This area was practically abandoned. They were led by an officer, tall, binoculars in hand. He would be the first. Always the first. Jack raised his bow. The world shrank to 3 things: his breath, the wind, and the target. Inhale, exhale, a faint left-to-right breeze, 3 degrees compensation. He drew the bowstring. The wood creaked, a sound that was music to him. The German officer paused, looked toward the hill, and for a heartbeat it felt as if his eyes met Jack's across the distance. Then Jack loosed the arrow. The arrow cut through the air in complete silence. No gunshot, no muzzle flash, only the faint whisper of wood and steel slicing the wind. It struck the German officer square in the chest. He collapsed without a sound, no scream, no warning, just down. The Germans froze, confused. A shot? No shot. They saw their fallen officer, saw the arrow sticking from his chest, and for a moment their minds simply failed to process what they were seeing. An arrow? In 1940? That moment of disbelief cost them dearly. Jack already had his second arrow knocked. He fired. Another German dropped. This time the others reacted, but they didn't know where to aim. No gunshot revealed the shooter, no sound to triangulate. Only silent death arriving from somewhere in the fog. Panic. The Germans scattered, searching for cover, yelling contradictory orders. And as they regrouped, Jack did something no one expected. He switched positions. He left the bow behind, dashed toward the anti-tank gun, and waited. One man against an army. The German patrol called for reinforcements. 10 minutes later, vehicles arrived, a light truck full of soldiers and an armored reconnaissance vehicle. They advanced cautiously toward the hill, expecting at least a British platoon entrenched there. Jack waited until they were 200 meters away, then fired the anti-tank gun. The shell hit the truck dead center. Explosion, fire, screams. The armored vehicle halted, turrets swiveling to locate the shooter. But Jack was already gone. He had moved to another position, grabbed his rifle, and was now firing short, precise bursts from a completely different angle. The Germans returned fire toward where they thought he was. Bullets tore through sandbags, hit the abandoned gun. Not him. It was a deadly dance. Jack kept moving, firing from different spots, switching weapons, creating the illusion of multiple defenders. The Germans began to believe they were facing a significant force. A German captain, observing the situation, wrote in his field notes, "Fierce resistance, at least one entrenched company, requesting artillery." He had no idea it was a single man, a madman with a bow, a sword, and absolutely no intention of surrendering. The impossible withdrawal. 37 minutes. That's how long Jack held the position. 37 minutes of fire, movement, calculated confusion, and sheer stubbornness. The Germans finally brought in mortars. Shells began falling on the hill, throwing up columns of dirt and smoke. It was time to go. Jack did something his comrades later described as absolutely insane. Before retreating, he took out his bagpipes, stepped onto the crest of the hill, fully visible, and played a Scottish march. The sound echoed across the battlefield. The Germans froze, stunned. What kind of soldier plays music in the middle of combat? Then Jack vanished back into the fog, running south toward his lines. The Germans took the position 20 minutes later. They found a destroyed anti-tank gun, scattered rifle casings from different angles, 3 arrows stuck in trees, and no British bodies. The German report concluded, enemy retreated in order after inflicting significant casualties. Resistance unexpectedly strong. They never knew it had been one man. And that man had just saved 300 British soldiers who escaped while he held off an entire German force.
When Jack returned to the British lines, covered in dust and sweat, his commanders stared at him as if seeing a ghost. "Churchill, how the hell—" Jack simply smiled, wiping a sword he hadn't even needed. "I told you I'd buy you 30 minutes, sir. I gave you 37. I hope you used them well." That day, the legend of Mad Jack Churchill was born.
Norway, 1941. The Charge of the Madman. After France, Jack was no longer a curiosity. He was a living legend. Stories of the soldier with the bow spread through British barracks like wildfire. Some adored him. Others thought the tales were exaggerated. Everyone wanted to see him in action. In December 1941, Jack was assigned to a raid in Norway, a nighttime assault on a fortified German position on the island of Vågsøy. The objective? Destroy facilities and capture prisoners for interrogation. The mission was considered extremely dangerous. Jack was put in charge of an assault group. The night was pitch black. No moon. The Arctic wind howled, sharp and cruel. Jack's men trembled, not just from cold, but from nerves. They knew any mistake in that frozen terrain meant death. As they waited for the attack signal, Jack did something no one expected. He took out his bagpipes. "Sir," a sergeant whispered, "what are you doing?" "I'm preparing to pay my respects. I cannot attack without proper music," Jack answered. And then, in the polar darkness, he began to play. The sound of Scottish bagpipes carried over the ice and snow. Germans in their bunkers sat upright, startled and confused. "Music! Here! Now!" "Forward!" Jack shouted, charging up the hill with his claymore drawn, the bagpipe still wheezing under his arm. His men followed, because what else could you do when your commander was charging the enemy, playing music and wielding a medieval sword? 42 prisoners. The German confusion was total. They weren't expecting an attack, much less one led by a lunatic with bagpipes and a broadsword. Jack stormed into the first bunker before they could react. His claymore whistled through the darkness, not to kill, interestingly. Jack used the sword more as intimidation than as a killing tool. He pointed it at throats, at faces, barking orders in functional German. "Raus! Schnell! Hände hoch!" The Germans came out with hands raised, terrified of this impossible apparition. A Brit with a sword appearing in the night like some Highland spirit of vengeance. Bunker after bunker Jack advanced. His men followed, not only by his bravery, but his efficiency. Every movement calculated, every decision instant and correct. Jack seemed to possess a sixth sense for battle. By the end of the night, Jack Churchill had personally captured 42 German soldiers. 42! Alone, with a sword. The British official report included a marginal note from an intelligence officer, confirming these numbers although they appear implausible. The German prisoners, when interrogated, described Jack as a demon, a crusader ghost, something that should not exist in this war. One young corporal summed it up best. "He didn't seem human. He had no fear. He smiled while attacking us. What kind of man smiles in battle?" The answer, of course, Jack Churchill. Italy, 1943. The Immortal. By 1943, Jack had been promoted to lieutenant colonel. He commanded his own commando unit, and his reputation had achieved mythical proportions. In Italy, during the Salerno campaign, Jack led some of the boldest and most dangerous assaults of the entire war. His leadership philosophy was simple: and terrifying. "Follow me. You will not die before I do." And he meant it. Jack always went first, always the first under enemy fire, always the last to retreat. During a nighttime attack on a heavily defended German position, Jack ran straight toward enemy machine guns with a grenade in each hand. He threw them, dove to the ground during the explosions, then got up and kept advancing with his sword. His men didn't follow because they had to. They followed because watching Jack charge into danger ignited something primal in them: inspiration, shame at their own fear, and the absolute certainty that if Jack could do it, so could they. They took positions military manuals claimed required entire battalions. Jack did it with 30 men. The Germans began to fear the night, because the night meant Jack Churchill could be out there, and when Jack attacked, nothing was safe. A German officer, later captured, wrote in his diary, "Fighting him feels like fighting a character from legend. I don't know whether to shoot him or ask for an autograph." The capture. But even legends have limits. In May 1944, during an operation in Yugoslavia, Jack's group was ambushed. Outnumbered 10-1, they fought desperately. Jack, as always, was the last to fall. They surrounded him after his ammunition ran out. They found him sitting on a rock, playing a sad tune on his bagpipes, surrounded by dead and wounded Germans. His sword was planted in the ground before him. 3 arrows remained in his quiver. When ordered to surrender, Jack finished his song, stood up slowly, and said in perfect German, "Gentlemen, you are lucky. My bow jammed. Otherwise, you would all be dead." He wasn't boasting. The Germans believed him completely. The impossible escape. The Germans had no idea what to do with Jack Churchill. They interrogated him, but he only smiled and gave absurd answers. They sent him to a POW camp near Berlin, assuming he'd be harmless there. They were wrong. Jack escaped twice. The first time, he walked over 150 kilometers towards the border before being recaptured near the Baltic coast. They found him cheerfully whistling, strolling along a road as if on a Sunday outing. The second time, he made it all the way to Italy, 180 kilometers through enemy territory, sleeping by day, moving by night, stealing food from farms, dodging patrols. When he finally reached Allied lines, the Italian partisans guarding the checkpoint didn't believe him at first. "You escaped from Germany, on foot." "Well, running when necessary. Do you have tea? I'd very much like a cup of tea." The German guards who chased him later described Jack with fearful respect. One wrote, "He did not seem to tire. He did not seem to doubt. It was as if the concept of surrender simply did not exist in his mind." The war ends, but not for Jack. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Jack Churchill was deeply disappointed. "If those damn Yanks hadn't entered the war, we could have gone on for another 10 years. Half joke, half serious. He immediately volunteered for transfer to the Pacific Theater. He wanted to fight Japan, but by the time he completed paratrooper training, the atomic bombs had fallen, and Japan surrendered. Jack was literally furious. "Damn it! Another war ended before I could even finish starting it." His comrades didn't know whether to laugh or worry.
The man behind the myth. After the war, Jack Churchill lived a life just as extraordinary as his military service. He became a parachute instructor. He surfed in Germany, being one of the first to do so in that country. He designed and built his own sailboats.
He worked briefly in Australia as a radio operator. But always, always he carried memories of the war with him. Not with trauma, interestingly. Jack never showed signs of what we now call post-traumatic stress. Instead, he spoke of his experiences as the most exciting adventures of his life. "Life is more thrilling," he used to say, "when you do what others don't dare to do." His former comrades visited him regularly. They all had stories about Jack, stories that seemed too unbelievable to be true, but knowing Jack, they probably were. One veteran recalled, "Jack once told me the war had taught him something fundamental. Not that he was immortal, he knew he could die, but that fear only exists if you let it in, and he simply never opened the door to it." The impossible legacy. In the decades after the war, debates arose among military historians about Jack Churchill. Some saw him as a lucky eccentric, others as a tactical genius disguised as a madman. All agreed he was unique. His feats were officially documented. The longbow shot in France is recorded as the last confirmed longbow kill in modern combat. His captures in Norway are in the British military archives. His escapes are documented by German and Allied records. Everything was real. Everything had truly happened. And yet, part of the mystery of Jack Churchill was that even with all the documentation, even with all the testimonies, it still felt impossible to fully believe. It was as if reality itself had bent slightly to accommodate his existence. How could one man stop the German advance with a bow? How did he capture 42 prisoners with a sword? How did he walk hundreds of kilometers through enemy territory, not once, but twice? The answer in the end wasn't in his equipment. It wasn't in his tactics. It wasn't even in his bravery, though he had that in abundance. It was in his spirit. Jack Churchill represented something modern war had tried to eliminate, the idea that one individual with enough will and skill could change the course of entire battles, the idea that heroism hadn't died in the trenches of World War I, the idea that even in an age of machines and industrial death, there was still room for personal glory. The final lesson. Jack Churchill died in 1996, at 90 years old. He lived longer than most men of his generation, especially considering the risks he had taken. At his funeral, veterans from multiple conflicts came to pay their respects. Some had served with him, others simply knew the stories. All understood they were burying not just a man, but an era. There will never be more soldiers like Jack Churchill. Not because modern men lack courage, but because war has changed in ways that make his kind of individual heroism impossible. Drones don't get intimidated by swords. Satellites don't get confused by arrows. Modern warfare is too impersonal, too technological, too distant for the kind of combat Jack loved. And yet, his legacy remains. Not in military manuals, not in tactics that can be taught, but in something more fundamental. Jack Churchill reminds us that tools do not define the warrior, that modernity is not the same as effectiveness, that true courage doesn't need the latest weapons, only the will to use them. He reminds us that even when everything seems lost, when you're outnumbered and surrounded, when common sense says to surrender, you can still choose to fight. And if you're going to fight, you might as well do it with style. The final reflection. The Germans advancing that morning in May 1940 thought they had won. The British line had collapsed. Victory seemed assured. It was only a matter of time. They didn't know that in front of them stood a man who didn't understand the concept of inevitable defeat. A man who had decided at some point in his life that if he was going to live, he would live fully. And if he was going to die, he would die in a way worth remembering. It wasn't the best weapon. It wasn't the best tactic. It wasn't even, strictly speaking, the smartest decision to stay alone against an army. It was something purer than all that. It was the human spirit pushed to its absolute limit. It was the refusal to accept that circumstances dictate the outcome. It was the insistence that one man, one single man with enough determination, can change what seems inevitable. The day the Germans thought they had won, one man proved to them that war isn't won until the last soldier stops fighting. And Jack Churchill, well, Jack Churchill never stopped fighting. Not because he didn't know fear, but because he'd decided fear wasn't a good enough reason to stop. Not because he thought he was immortal, but because he decided mortality wasn't an excuse not to try. Not because he was a superhuman, but because he understood something most people never grasp. We are exactly as brave as we choose to be. So he took his bow, his sword, and his bagpipes, and he went out to show the 20th century that the warriors of the past had not been forgotten, that glory wasn't dead, that honor wasn't an empty word. And for 37 minutes on a hill in France, for a night in Norway, through countless battles in Italy and Yugoslavia and beyond, he proved it. One arrow at a time, one step at a time, one impossible battle at a time, until there were no battles left to fight. Mad Jack Churchill made history not because of his strength, not because of his weapons, not because of his tactics. He made history by reminding the world that true courage doesn't need modernity. It only needs will. And maybe, just maybe, a good sword and a sense of humor.